This is a weird feeling, but I can actually see all of you, I think. So my name is Lisa Hoffmeister, as Nick said. I'm sitting here in my mom's dining room, which I did not expect to be, but I'm thrilled to be here. She's asleep in the next room and is doing so much better after a week stay in the hospital. But Sulia and I are excited to talk to you about a group that we've both been involved with. Sulia and I are confirmation mentor and mentee, and we've been getting to know each other over the past few years. And I was so excited when she expressed interest in this group called Braver Angels that I started getting involved with about 2 years ago. So it's something that we have bonded over the past few years, and what a neat opportunity this is to talk about it with all of you together. When we were asked to talk to you about about Braver Angels and kind of what it means to us, and maybe share some of the exercises with you, we were both really excited for the opportunity. So thank you for that. We figured we would start by just quickly saying like how we got involved. And then I've ended up preparing some slides to share with you just so you have some visuals to go with some of the stories that we're telling and what Braver Angels is all about. And then we have an exercise that comes from a Braver Angels workshop, and then we can have some discussion about whether these are some ideas that we want to pursue further as part of the Madison Christian community. So quickly for me, I have 2 yard signs in my yard, and I have for years. One of them says Black Lives Matter, and one of them says we support our Madison police. And I was always felt really confused by why it didn't seem like it was okay to think that both of those things were true. And I didn't really have too many conversations with people about it. It didn't seem like people wanted to talk about that. They wanted to talk about one side or the other. But when I read an article, I think it was just before the pandemic, in Yes Magazine about Braver Angels, which was this grassroots organization that started right after the 2016 election and is striving to depolarize America. I was immediately hooked, and I looked up the nearest workshop, and I found one in Rockford the next weekend, and I drove down and I attended it, and I loved it. And it turned out that someone was just forming an alliance, they call it, in Madison. And the alliances, I can tell you more about those later, but it just speaks to my heart. It just speaks to the fact that things aren't black and white, but they're very gray. And it's so important to understand all those nuances and actually listen to our fellow citizens about what they're thinking. My mind hasn't changed about any of the positions so far, but I often come away thinking, I never thought of it that way. And I feel like in some ways my positions have been strengthened because I now understand the opposition and I can address it more directly. So it's been a wonderful experience for me. And again, we'll talk more about that in a bit. Julia, why don't you tell your piece of it?
So when Lisa became a confirmation mentor, what, a couple years ago or something, obviously it was kind of during the peak pandemic and we couldn't be together as much. So we were actually doing our confirmation project over Zoom. We watched the documentary and had a really good discussion with another confirmation group about it. And I think that was when Lisa told me about Braver Angels and invited me to one of the Zoom meetings, which I attended, and because I really wanted to attend it because it was so interesting to think about talking to people who are of political view, and the discussions are all moderated, and so it's very kind of more neutral environment, so you can talk about what you want to. And after the first meeting that I attended, it was like I just kind of had to sit there and think about it for a while. It's so interesting to hear the opinions of, there were some other like girls my age who are polar opposite views than I am. And it was so interesting to hear their opinions about the election that was going on at the time and things like that, that I thought of totally differently. So.
Yeah, thanks, Sulia. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now with a couple of slides. So it's kind of a funny story. Braver Angels was formed and named based on this quote. I'm assuming that people can see my screen now. Yes, I'm not even sure I can see you. You'll yell and scream if you can. And so it's originally called Better Angels, after this quote from Abraham Lincoln, which some of you are probably familiar. But after a year or so, Ken Burns asked them not to use that name, because I can't remember if he has a documentary called that, or maybe that's the name of his organization. I can't quite remember. So they changed their name to Braver Angels, which felt like a real disappointment at first, but it turned out to be a very apt name, because it requires a lot of courage to enter into some of these discussions. And then once you're in the discussions, to speak up. And sometimes one of the things that we do with each other is we catch each other saying things that are kind of polarizing or disrespectful without even realizing it. So I'll get into that in a bit. So this is the mission statement of Braver Angel: to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. And you hear that kind of rhetoric throughout. It feels very inspirational, like being part of something that's bigger than I am. This is a term that I forgot about when I was getting ready for this session. I forgot that they kind of coined this term of patriotic empathy. The idea that our love for our country is shown by our concern for our fellow citizens, no matter what color stripes they wear. And that is, again, echoed throughout all this kind of an underlying principle of a lot of their workshops. Just to go back to this slide, I guess, for a moment and give you a bit of background. Again, it was formed in 2016. It's completely grassroots organization, but it has grown immensely. And the pandemic, like for so many of us, it forced them to go online. And so now all of these incredible numbers of very thoughtfully designed sessions are now available online. They have red-blue workshops, skills for bridging the divide in families. They have workshops for families that have been torn apart by politics. And one of the neat things is that one of the co-founders, Bill Doherty, is works at the University of Minnesota, and he's a professor in counseling and psychology, and many of the workshops are built on the principles of couples therapy. So if any of you have been to couples therapy, you'll hear a lot of the same things in terms of listening respectfully to one another and watching what you say. Sometimes words that come out of your mouth are actually quite damaging, and you don't even realize it, because I myself have caught myself saying things that I'm used to saying in a group of people that I know agree with me. But then when it comes out differently when you're not, and it can be quite condescending. Just to give you a sense, these are a few of the topics of the National Braver Angels debate. They are aired several times a month, and they are all online now. And they're not like your typical debate. It's not like a presidential debate. In fact, I would love it if somehow Braver Angels got permission to conduct a presidential debate in 2 years. They are very well organized. They use Robert's Rules of Order. It's quite a thing to witness. But these are some examples of the resolutions, and the resolutions are always phrased in a way that people can either argue for them or against them. And so they've been fascinating to watch. A few of the topics we've discussed here locally in our Madison BA Alliance, which I mentioned twice a month. Gerrymandering, you can see the list here. Pretty fascinating discussions, and it has taken us a while to warm up, but we have new people joining us all the time. And I wanted to share an interchange. Somebody sent out a summary of one of our meetings, and this is how it went. I took this directly from an email that summarized the meeting, and it was about voter fraud versus suppression. And there was something that happened in it that was quite remarkable. So there was this moment when Dan raised a strong, heartfelt concern, and then Kathleen gently intervened, and he had used the word outrageous to describe the views of the other side, and it felt, it just didn't feel right. It made the conversation go south when it was such a positive conversation, and so then he retracted the word, it was the most amazing interchange, like this man summarized here. It was just, we're not used to gently, respectfully calling each other out on language, which is inherently polarizing. It was such a cool exchange, and I was so glad that I witnessed it. And I've since witnessed several like it. And every time it happens, it's just, there's gratitude. There's so much gratitude because it's just such an unusual thing. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Any questions so far? Or Sulia, do you want to share anything additional about your responses to the first couple of meetings that you attended?
Well, I attended one meeting online and then, or maybe two, I think it was one, and then one meeting in person. And something that I found, especially when I attended the meeting in person, is that unless people outright said their political views, sometimes you couldn't really tell what side they were really on. It was a very neutral discussion. So I didn't know these people and I didn't know their background. And so I was able to think about the things that they were saying as an unbiased person. I wasn't thinking about what they might have gotten these ideas or what they might think about the political aspect of these ideas. And so it was a very unique experience to have a discussion as just kind of like being thrown into there with no ideas about the people or what they think.
I have a question about how did you get the different types of people together to meet in the first place?
Lisa, did you hear that?
No, I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Okay. How did you get the different types of people from different groups perspectives to meet together in the first place?
That's a great question. It is crucial that these groups are well balanced. And it has been more difficult to find. We call them reds and blues and purples. It's been more difficult to find reds, especially in Madison, but actually all across the country. We're in a time where the folks who are more conservative are afraid of speaking up for fear of being just crucified. And but we have found, actually, the local alliance was started by a professor at Madison who is conservative and had a few conservative friends. And I'm not even sure how I think the first kernel of it was started just by people who knew each other, and they had liberal and conservative friends. So it's maybe 4 people. Some spouses are involved too, for example. And then word started to spread because we're listed on the national directory for Braver Angels as an alliance in Wisconsin. I think there are only 3 alliances in Wisconsin. There's one in the Milwaukee area, and there's one in the Northwoods, which we have met with before, actually. But it is a challenge to find conservatives. We have a progressive member who lives out in Barneveld who has many, quote, red friends, and she has been working for months to try to get them to attend our meetings. And just, you don't even have to turn your camera on, you can just listen, she'll say. And she's been successful. It's taken a while. People are really reluctant, but it has been a slow and steady increase in basically word of mouth, I would say. Any other questions? Okay. Well, one of the, if you were to go to the Braver Angels website and look up, you know, what we do, one of the offerings is a number of workshops. And the most basic workshop, the one that I attended several years ago, is called the Red Blue Workshop. And they hope to attract equal numbers of red and blues. And then they have several exercises where they talk through things. We thought that one of the exercises would be really good to do today. And that's called the stereotype exercise. And we obviously don't have a diverse group, red and blue wise, here today, but it works just as well. And so what they want us to do is talk about, like, what are the stereotypes of progressives in this case? What they do in the actual workshop is that the blues and the reds divide up and they talk amongst themselves. What are the stereotypes of our group? What is false about them? But where might there be a kernel of truth in those stereotypes? And it's and then the two groups get back together and discuss them. So we thought maybe it would be interesting for us to just talk about, from a progressive perspective, what kind of stereotypes exist about us, about our groups, about liberal, progressive, things like that. And we're a small enough group, I think we can just stay in our big group. I might have a little bit of trouble hearing. So Sulia, if you can maybe even step in and help facilitate this discussion for maybe 5-10 minutes, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So
Anybody want to start?
Do you want to use the mic? Would that help for current?
Yeah.
It might. Sulia, were you using a mic?
no, I'm not.
Okay, I was having a little trouble hearing you too, so maybe the mic would help if you all don't mind.
1, 2. Let's use this back and forth so we can keep the other one on.
So if anybody has any ideas about stereotypes about progressive people or liberal people, and you want to share, that's great. Otherwise, me and Lisa can also share what we think.
Like kale and quinoa.
Lisa, did you hear that?
I didn't.
We like kale and quinoa.
That we think that we don't do anything immoral.
That's a good one. That we don't do anything. We think that we don't do anything immoral.
Mm.
I think one that Lisa and I had talked about when we were planning for this was the idea that liberals and progressive people are often kind of similarly, they're self-righteous, kind of think that we're right all the time, and that isn't necessarily true.
Yes, one of the women in our group, she talks a lot about self-righteous indignation, and what an honestly addictive, I mean, here's the kernel of truth in it, I think, is that it can be really addictive for both sides, for everyone. It's a human instinct, I think, to have that sort of indignation about what another person views and how that feeling itself can be. I will definitely admit being feeling that, like it's a bit of an addictive feeling.
I think another one, an offshoot of that is that maybe we may come off that we really think we understand truly what Black persons, Indigenous persons, and so we can really empathize because we really get it when we have not had the life, we've not lived that life.
Yeah, I think
That we never have to meet a payroll or pay off the bank loan to run a business.
that what you learn in a college classroom automatically is better than what you learn by looking a legal job.
Did you hear that, Lisa?
Can you repeat? It's not so much the volume, it's the echoing that makes it difficult to understand. I'm sorry.
That what you learn in a college classroom is more than what you learn like working a labor job.
Yes.
I would say that, in essence, think they're the empathetic ones and that the other side is just selfish.
Lisa, did you hear that?
No, I'm sorry. Can you maybe just repeat each of them?
That we think that we're the empathetic ones. I forgot the whole.
And the other side is selfish.
And that the other side is selfish.
Mm-hmm.
I think another is that change is always better than tradition.
That change, thinking that change is always better than tradition.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive into some of these. This is a great list. I'm jotting them down. Think of one that resonated with you. Where do you see that those aren't fair, or where do you see that there are kernels of truth?
Yeah, I'll give an example for the self-righteousness. Sometimes I feel myself slipping into the ideals that I know what's going on here. I'm talking to people in school that aren't necessarily as progressive as I am. I kind of think I've got this all figured out. Whereas
Well, it seems, it's sort of astounding to me to think that we assume that the other side doesn't care, or that they aren't, loving family, friends, they have relationships, just like, and that they, about any of the issues don't come from a sense of wanting the best for people, and that we just inherently, by thinking that, are excluding them from a sense of care and compassion or empathy for people that think differently.
and thinking that the other side doesn't care, as if they don't also come from welcoming, loving families, and that they don't also want the best for those that they love. And how it kind of excludes them from.
Yeah, I think one of the sessions we had on critical race theory, which is kind of one of my hot buttons, is I have fallen into the trap of thinking that the opponents of critical race theory don't value history. They don't want our students to know what really happened in the United States. They want to whitewash everything. That's I have had a lot of feelings like that, and one of the conservatives in our group, he made it so clear by the stories he told how much he values our history and our true history. But his opposition to critical race theory is more that it's like, how did he say it? It doesn't, it starts with its conclusion, and it doesn't seem to leave a lot of room for intellectual inquiry, which I thought it was one of those, I've never thought of it that way before. Like I personally believe in the tenets of critical race theory. I think that there is systemic racism, et cetera, but his point, and the whole that systemic racism exists is still a slippery one, I think, with our group, but it's not, putting them into that extreme bucket of you just want to make up lies about our past and make us sound like this glorious nation when we do have flaws isn't true, at least for this particular group of people. Obviously, there's a huge amount of variation, but I found that to be so enlightening because it was easy for me to just assume that they don't value the same things that I do, for example. The comment about education, you know, what you learn in a college classroom and things like that, that's another thing that I've become more sensitive to is, you know, we tend to get stereotyped as these intellectual elites and we think that we're smarter and better than everybody else. And I wrote a letter to the editor about the firing of a Madison school teacher over a history lesson over the holidays. And it never got published, but I had some of my Braver Angel friends read it before I sent it in. And I got feedback that some of the language I used was a little bit difficult. Like it's something that I learned and I like having a vocabulary and I like to use it, but I didn't realize how off-putting some of the words that I used were. It kind of made me sound like I was an elite. And I got that feedback, thankfully, from somebody who was willing to tell me the truth about it. But that was another lesson learned for me. And, you know, there's a little bit of truth to that, I got to say, for myself. Any other thoughts?
I think a thing that, well, at least I'll say liberals or progressives are possibly more going to, and that is, you know, like in law, if you're writing briefs to the judge, and you know the other side has some facts that are against you, you have to sort of be humble enough to admit that those facts exist and generally come to the middle a little bit, because if you totally deny it, then you lose credibility with the judge, because the judge says, no, really, you're on camera, you know, and all that kind of stuff. You can't, but I think probably both sides do it, but I think being in Madison, there's a lot more denying that we deny facts, that we do, you know, I mean, so if somebody says from the red side, wait a second, that's what really happened here, we'll do a whole lot of either shaming the person to say, oh, that's terrible, you should never bring that up because you're blaming the victim or whatever else it is, and we'll do a lot of dancing to sort of say, those facts don't exist, and then the other side says, well, they're crazy. Those facts clearly do exist, you know, and so they just sort of brush us off because we're not willing to do it. And I think we are not very good at admitting that we do that a lot. And therefore we do lose credibility, you know.
Lisa, did you catch that?
I did. Somehow I got that one. That was great. I think that there's so many times that it's just like, if only they could just acknowledge that that thing happened or that exists, it would gain so much credibility and it would level things out. But it's just, we zoom on right past. That's a great point.
Well, it's really scary to admit that you're wrong or that you have thought something or changed your mind. So, I mean, just think how hard it is for you to admit that maybe something that you firmly believed in has changed, because somehow that is seen as a weakness as opposed to, oh, I've learned from that. So if you take that out and just spread it, then you can see why people don't want to admit that. It takes a lot of humility to admit that you're wrong, and strength.
Yep.
Well, I
And
think
just,
also the labels that we've been forced into in the last for years of you're either progressive and liberal or you're conservative. That's one thing that really bothers me because I tend to try to think of myself as more of a humanist, or someone that cares about other human beings, not associated with, am I progressive, liberal, am I in the middle, where am I on the continuum? And I think that's colored this whole ability to, like you're saying, is think of people that care about others, and then there's this other stuff going on that may be focusing on caring about other human beings, caring about our community. Because once you start talking that way, all of a sudden you have more common. And I find with friends, I have a very best friend who now has moved to Arizona, been there for many, many years. She's been the dearest, kindest friend of Norfolk than anyone. But her political views have turned so right that sometimes it's hard for us to have discussions, just talking on the phone. She'll say, oh, I heard this the other day. And what I found with her is sometimes what I can do is say, you know, I read this thing from the interviews that were done with slaves, and it was produced during the FDR era down in the South that had been slaves, and they interviewed them, and they were now in their 80s. And they told the stories of their lives and what it was like and what it was like to grow up. I said, and that it just blew me away to hear this first person. And she just went, oh, really? Tell me more. And it was more of not, it was just like, oh, I just read this, and it just fascinated me, and I'll share it with you. And we didn't even talk about politics, but that's just a couple things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, the whole labeling, there is one person in our group who really objects to how we are asked to identify as red or blue. And I get it. I wish we didn't, and maybe we'll get to that place. But I think the reason that Braver Angels asks us to is so that you identify as red, blue, or purple, and then words might come out of your mouth that totally buff the stereotype of your side, which is in and of itself a enlightening experience. But yeah, when you can get past that, how wonderful when you can actually talk about real things like that and get past the arguments and the stereotypes. That's wonderful.
I think to the extent that we live increasingly in cities that are sort of silos of one thing or another, and the thing that I think about is there's this image to this guy who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and you have it, and the one you see it, and it looks like it's ABC, and the next thing that you're looking at it looks like you're seeing 12, 13, and 14. Well, it turns out that the image for B and the image for 13 are identical. They're absolutely identical to each other, but because in the first thing, you're thinking letters, because it's surrounded by other letters, and the other thing you're thinking numbers, you don't even think that you have a problem with what you saw, that one is absolutely a B and one is absolutely a 13. And, you know, the Arizona thing, I mean, my sister moved down there. You're in this envelope, and so it's exactly the same piece of news that she got before, but she's surrounded, and so she has a she already has the momentum to see it as a red issue, whereas if she saw it up here, she would see it as a blue, and we're totally ignorant of it. I mean, I'm totally ignorant of it as well. I'll look at something and I'll say, well, of course that was a B, you know, and it wasn't of course a B, it was either one of those two things.
Did you catch that, Lisa?
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a question? In the Greater Angels, Greater Angels organization, do people who come get any training? Are there any specific rubrics for how to have conversations that are taught? Or do you just put people in a room and the peer pressure kind of works out?
So are you asking if we have a rubric or a framework in which to hold our discussions?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we do. I will say our group started off pretty loosey-goosey. You know, there are a ton of resources on the website. Whether people go read all those is another story. I will admit we didn't do a great job of that. We were excited to find a group of people who felt strongly about connecting. So we made up our own agendas at the beginning. Like one of them was just share a story about when you believe strongly about something and then you changed your mind. And that was a really wonderful one. You know, it's just like, what can we do to get people talking? That's really all we needed. We didn't, and then the ground rules about not interrupting, letting people finish, encouraging quiet people to speak up, and most importantly, avoiding heavy sighs and eye rolls when you hear something that you disagree with. But that particular meeting where we just talked about something where we changed our mind, it was really great because it normalized being wrong. It normalized being open to new ideas. It normalized changing your mind. And so after that, then we would take turns. We've been taking turns leading a topic, and it could be whatever you want. And ideally, like we brought in some guest speakers, but it's not super organized. We've never been big enough to break out into breakout rooms or anything like that. The national meetings are much, much more structured, but yes, they do have tons of guidelines and rubrics for how to conduct these meetings. The resources are just unbelievable. And they're all, I mean, I think to join Braver Angels, I think I don't know, I think it was $12 a year or something. And then you get access to even more resources, but most of their workshops are free. You know, they're just really trying to get the word out there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So it is 10 o'clock here, and there's people from Hope who are pushing us out of the way. So we will be in touch with you, and we'll try to figure out how to do a follow-up.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your coming.
First with you down there, Lisa. Maybe also Sulia.
I know who's here. But I will send out an email with some follow-up stuff that we do, or at least I think this is very good. And I sort of mentioned only half taken to that what would be interesting is to pair up men from a game that players in progressive. So, you know, we don't have to go to Rush Limbo people and just see what people can talk about as a starter thing. Because I think having that experience is a lot different than just peace is wonderful, but it's not the same experience as actually having a coffee with some people and talking about it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Lisa. Prayers with you.
Thank you, Nick. Bye-bye. Bye, Sulia.